Hey, this is Scarf Bonsai. I've been thinking of buying an older camera just to try it out, see how it works compared to the stuff that I have currently, and I ended up with a Canon EOS 30D. I picked this up from KH.com, a bargain version. It's actually around $50 to $51 shipped with their 12% discount that they had at the time. But there are a few quirks, so this actually is going to turn into somewhat of a project, I think. With this camera, I've noticed one thing: the firmware is not the last firmware that was released for it. And of course, Canon doesn't have that firmware on their websites anymore. They have a few dead pages that go into like the global Canon site. It doesn't exist. However, I found the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, cached 2 copies of the 1.0.6 firmware for this camera. First thing to do with it is to make sure it has all the features and functions that it had at the end of its life cycle. Extracted the file. You can see it a firmware file. I copied it to my compact flash card. Let it update. It knows it needs to update. First thing for this camera is complete. We're up to 1.0.6. A bigger issue with this camera that I've noticed when I look through the viewfinder, I focus. It focuses and it confirms focus, but it's obviously not in focus where it should be. I eventually went into the focusing screen area of the camera. Thankfully, I was able to get in there pretty easily, and whoever used this camera beforehand or worked on it had the focusing screen flipped around. There's a little notch and like a ridge on the edge of that focusing screen, and it was flipped around where there's also a little shim inside there that would butt up against that, but they had it flipped around, so it was using more space than it needed to, or basically offsetting the focusing screen. I eventually figured out that I needed to flip that around, put it back in there. There's some dust now, but it does work. So when I focus the camera, autofocus, I see, okay, in the viewfinder it is showing focus as well, and that was the main issue. So that is all worked out. If you know anything about DSLRs, you'll know that there is an autofocus system that uses mirrors, and basically it's separate from the sensor. With all the mirrorless cameras, they use stuff on the sensor to focus, either contrast-based or with phase detect sights on the sensors. But with DSLRs, that's not the case. It has a separate sensor, and if it's misaligned in some way, it's not going to work properly with the lens, the setup, and where the sensor is. Generally, there are a few ways to adjust it. I've been searching online. The information is pretty sparse. So far, I've found a few tidbits of information that I think might work for the camera. Of course, this camera doesn't have any software-based adjustments in it. Here is that DP review forum posting that I saw where the person was talking about adjusting, calibrating the autofocus system on the 30D. So he goes and he posts this link to a French website, and this guy goes about, this is what we're looking for. So I could probably translate this and look at it in more detail, but that's what I'm going to try out. He says it sticks in there. You push it up or down to adjust the focus. So I was messing with that for a really long time. After 2 attempts, I did get this camera working with autofocus. Needed some adjustment, and it really took quite a bit of effort to make that good enough. The first photo outing, the focus was definitely off. I could tell from the resulting photos, but the second one seemed pretty spot on. Nice thing with the Canon cameras, saves autofocus point into the metadata, and then later on in the Canon software, I don't know if any other software allows this or is able to do it. So when I'm going to check all these photos, I'll be able to see where it focused and then see if it is actually where it should be based on the autofocus system, the adjustments that I did and all that. Nice thing about this camera, it has some features that you won't be getting even in newer stuff. 1/8,000th of a second maximum shutter speed. So when I'm using this 50mm lens, f1.8, it's super bright out right now, which is nice, but that helps out. So $50 camera, that's pretty crazy. I did take this camera out with the M50, side-by-side photos. they are relatively similar, which is pretty interesting. Of course, this is 8 megapixels versus 24, so there is more resolution with the M50, but still, I think the 30D did pretty well with detail in the photos. You can see that there is definitely some difference. You consider that there are a lot more pixels on the M50 side, but it is getting quite a bit more grain and stuff that you can visually see in those photos as we go up in the ISO. You can see definitely towards 1600, 3200, really big change there, but however, whenever I size the images to 3000 pixels on the long end, you can see they're very similar photos with noise and generally resolution. Do I recommend a camera like this, these old cheap digital SLRs? In this case, I think I got a pretty nice camera out of it. Of course, 8 megapixels won't give you that resolution in detail, depending on the lens of the newer stuff, the 24 megapixel, 30 whatever megapixel cameras. If you really need that resolution, not a great option, but if you want a larger, more robust camera like this, of course you have to select one out of the lineup of old used cameras, but in this case it's very solid feeling in the hands, which is nice. Big benefit over buying a super cheap new camera. Again, we saw in the video like there could be issues with not having the newest firmware that the camera had throughout its life cycle, or especially that autofocus issue, or even just the viewfinder with that flipped around focusing screen, which some people might not know how to change or know about in general. So I think you want to be a certain technical level to buy older cameras that are the super cheap ones. Now, if you buy something higher grade, you should not have any issues with weird stuff like I had. Most likely, those will just generally be in better condition. But if you can deal with the quirks that I had with this camera, you should have no issues and have a nice, fun camera to mess around with. Not care too much about damaging it because of the price. If you do want to use an older camera for more serious reasons, you might want to go up a step or two in the technology level. So having live view, being able to adjust the autofocus through software in the camera instead of going in there and doing a physical change to it. But there are a few other little things, maybe more resolution, of course, and a few features here and there that you can get, but you're going to pay 100, 200, 300, 400, 500 or whatever for something a little more higher technology. That will change as more and more cameras come on the market and more cameras go down the line of old used cameras. Anyways, hope you enjoyed this video on the 30D. I'm going to keep using it, keep trying it out, taking photos with it. It's pretty nice. Sky Photography Bonsai, thanks.